How? Mitakiapi Kixiakola. I'm here to continue my reading from yesterday. This is going to be chapter 1 uh, uh, of Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism by Kwame Nkrumah. And this chapter, the first chapter, is titled Africa's Resources. It might be a little long, but I know that everybody loves to hear my voice. All right. Chapter 1, Africa's Resources. Africa is a paradox which illustrates and highlights neocolonialism. Her earth is rich, yet the products that come from above and below her soil continue to enrich not Africans predominantly, but groups and individuals who operate to Africa's impoverishment. With a roughly estimated population of 280 million, about 8% of the world's population, Africa accounts for only 2% of the world's total production. Yet even the present very inadequate surveys of Africa's natural resources show the continent to have immense untapped wealth. We know that iron reserves are put at twice the size of America's and two-thirds those of the Soviet Union's. On the basis of an estimated 2 billion metric tons, Africa's calculated coal reserves are considered to be enough to last for 300 years. New petroleum fields are being discovered and brought into production all over the continent. Yet production of primary ores and minerals, considerable as it appears, has touched only the fringes. Africa has more than 40% of the world's potential water power, a greater share than any other continent, yet less than 5% of this volume has been utilized. Even taking into account the vast desert stretches of the Sahara, there is still in Africa more arable and pasture land than exists in either the United States of America or the Soviet Union. There is even more than in Asia. Our forest areas are twice as great as those of the United States. If Africa's multiple resources were used in her own development, they could place her among the modernized continents of the world. But her resources have and still are being used for greater development of overseas interests. Africa provided to Britain in 1957 the following proportions of basic materials used in her industries: tin ore and concentrates, 19%, iron ore, 29%, manganese, 80%, copper, 46%, bauxite, 47%, chrome ore, 50%, asbestos, 66%, cobalt, 82%, antimony, 91%. French imports from Africa include cotton, 32%, iron ore, 36%, zinc ore, 51%, lead, 85%, phosphates, 100%. To Germany, Africa provided copper imports, 8%, iron ore, 10%, lead ore, 12%, manganese ore, 20%, chrome ore, 22%, phosphorites, 71%. Yet in none of the new African countries is there a single integrated industry based upon any one of these resources. Although possessing 53 of the world's most important basic industrial minerals and metals, the African continent tails far behind all others in industrial development. Gauged on the production of primary products output and the total economic activity by comparison with the country of the most advanced production, the United States, the facts can be seen at a glance. And so basically, the book is showing a table. It's a table that basically compares it's got agriculture, forestry, mining, industry and manufacture, construction, transport and communications, commerce, public administration and defense, others. And that's it's like a table that shows primary percentages. You should read this book. It's got these tables in it. I wish I could show it to you, but I can't. I don't have the physical book. So to continue, it will be noted that in American agriculture, forestry, and fishing provide a mere 4% of the total national activity, and mining and trifling 1%. On the other hand, industry, manufacture, and commerce provide 47%. And the African countries included in the table, which are, with the exception of Nigeria, those with the highest settler communities and therefore the most exploited, agriculture is predominant. Industry, manufacture, and commerce lag far behind. even in the case of South Africa, the most highly industrialized sector of the African continent. The contribution of agriculture, 12%, and mining, 13%, are equal to those of industry, manufacture, and construction put together. However, on the whole, mining has proved a most profitable venture for foreign capital interests in Africa. Its benefits for Africans have by no means been on equal scale. Mining productions in a number of African countries has a value of less than $2 per head of population. As Europe, France, I guess this is the title of the book, Europe, Altrimer puts it, it is quite certain that a mining production of $1 or $2 per inhabitant cannot appreciably affect a country's standard of living. Affirming correctly that in the zones of exploitation the mining industry introduces a higher standard of living, the journal is forced to the conclusion that mining exploitations are, however, relatively privileged isolated islands in a very poor total economy. The reason for this is seen in the absence of industry and manufacture, owing to the fact that the mining production is destined principally for exportation, mainly in primary form. It goes to feed the industries and factories of Europe and America, to the impoverishment of the countries of origin. It is also remarked by Europe Altrimer that about 50% of Africa's mining production remains in the country of origin as wages. Even the most cursory glance at the annual accounts of the mining companies refutes this claim. The excess of revenue over expenditure in many cases proves conclusively by its size. The wages received by manual labor form no means such an exaggerated proportion of wealth produced as 50%. The considerable sums which go in highly paid salaries to European staffs in the skilled and administration categories, part of which is returned to their own countries, must in many instances amount to the total received by all African labor, to say nothing of the large amounts which swell the yearly incomes of wealthy directors who reside in the metropolitan cities of the West. This assumption also ignores another important fact, namely the wages of manual workers, low as they are partly spent on goods manufactured abroad and imported, taking out of the primary producing countries a good part of the workers' wages. In many cases, the imported goods are the products of the companies associated with the mining groups. Frequently, they are sold in the company's own stores, on the mining compounds, or by their appointed agents, the workers having to pay prices fixed by the companies. The poverty of the people of Africa is demonstrated... Excuse me, the lights went out. Alright, we're back. The poverty of the people of Africa is demonstrated by the simple fact that their income per capita is among the lowest in the world. And then we have another table here that shows African countries, and it's got 4 different categories. It's labeled income per capita, 1960 through 1963. Under 80, we have Basuto land, Bekono land, Burundi, Chad, Congo, Dahomey, Ethiopia, Guinea-Bissau, Malawi, Mali, Mozambique, Nigeria, Rwanda, Somalia, Tanganyika, Zanzibar, Uganda, and the Voltaic Republic. $81 to $125. Angola, Cameroon Republic, Congo. It says L next to it. Gambia, Guinea, Kenya, Malagasy Republic, Mauritania, Sierra Leone, Sudan, Togo, United Arab Republic. 126 through 200, Liberia, Libya, Morocco, Swaziland, and Tunisia. 200 to 250, Algeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, Ghana, Mauritius, Senegal, Southwest Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And then over 400, South Africa. So that was a table of income per capita in Africa 1960 through 1963. In some countries, for example, Gabon and Zambia, up to half the domestic product is paid to resident expatriates and to overseas firms who own the plantations and mines. In Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Libya, Swaziland, Southwest Africa, and Zimbabwe, foreign firm profits and settler or expatriate incomes exceed 1/3 of the domestic product. Algeria, Congo, and Kenya were in this group before independence. On achieving independence, almost every new state of Africa has developed plans for industrialization and rounded economic growth in order to improve productive capacity and thereby raise the standard of living of its people. But while Africa remains divided, progress is bound to be painfully slow. Economic development is dependent not only on the availability of natural resources and the size of the population of a country, but on economic size, which takes into account both population and income per capita. In many African states, the population and per capita products are extremely small, giving an economic unit no larger than a medium-sized firm in a Western capitalist country, or a single-state enterprise in a European socialist economy. Africa is having to pay a huge price, once more, for historical accident that this vast and compact continent brought fabulous profits to Western capitalism, first out of the trade in its people, and then out of imperialist exploitation. This enrichment of one side of the world out of the exploitation of the other has left the African economy without the means to industrialize. At the time when Europe passed into its own industrial revolution, there was a considerably narrower gap in development between the continents. But with every step in the evolution of productive methods and increased profits, drawn from more and more shrewd investment in manufacturing equipment and base metal production, the gap widened by leaps and bounds. The report of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, published in December 1902 under the title of Industrial Growth in Africa, states that the gap between the continents separated by the Mediterranean has widened faster during the 20th century than ever before. True, per capita output has increased in Africa, particularly in the last 2 decades, which have seen an increase of some 10 to 20%. Already far ahead, the industrial countries have marked a per capita advance in the same period of 60%, and their per capita industrial production may be estimated as high as 25 times that of Africa, or in Africa as a whole. The difference for the greater part of Africa, however, is even more marked, since industry on this continent tends to be concentrated in small areas in the north and south. A real transformation of the African economy would mean not only doubling agricultural output, but increasing industrial output some 25 times. The report makes it plain that industry rather than agriculture is the means by which rapid improvement in Africa's living standards is possible. There are, however, imperialists, specialists, and apologists who urge the less developed countries to concentrate on agriculture and leave industrialization for some later time when their population shall be well fed. The world's economic development, however, shows that it is only with advanced industrialization that it has been possible to raise the nutritional level of the people by raising their levels of income. Agriculture is important for many reasons, and the governments of the African states concerned with bringing higher standards to their people are devoting greater investment to agriculture. But even to make agriculture yield more aid of industrial output is needed, and the underdeveloped world cannot forever be placed at the mercy of the more industrialized. This dependence must slow the rate of increase in our agriculture and make it subservient to the demands of the industrial producers. That is why we cannot accept such sweeping assessments as that made by Professor Leopold G. Scheidel of the Vienna School of Economics at a recent meeting in London of the International Geographical Congress. Commented Professor Scheidel, I don't know fucking Austrian. And this is a quote. People in developing countries seem to think that all that is necessary for them to become wealthy as the West is to build factories. Most experts agree that it is wiser and more promising to develop agriculture into self-sufficiency and onto the level of a marketing economy. End quote. The Times, 24th of July, 1964. This train of thought links directly up with that of chairman of Booker Brothers, Sir Jock Campbell, whose combine of companies is busy monopolizing sugar and byproduct industries in British Guiana, shipping and trading in the Caribbean and East Africa, and is now penetrating into the west of the African continent. Sir Jock Campbell asserted at the annual address of the Africa Bureau in London on the 29th of November 1962 that, quote, agriculture was the basis of African development and that plantations were an effective method of increasing economic potential, end quote. He considered that so quote, so long as industrialized agriculture employed men free to come and go, it was preferable in terms of both efficiency and liberty to the communized collective farming, whose results had fallen short of expectation in both Russia and China, end quote. The Times, the 30th of November, 1962. He does not seem to have convinced the sugar workers of British Guiana, and it is a moot point whether he has been able to impress the benefits of his quote-unquote free to come and go plantation philosophy on the workers for his companies in Nyasaland, Rhodesia, and South Africa. Even the scientific supporters of the imperialist pattern are aware of the flaws in their injunctions, but they cunningly attribute the emphasis placed by the developing states upon industrialization to political ambitions rather than to economic and social necessity. A European representative of the University of Malaya, Mr. D. W. Fryer, speaking at the meeting of the International Geographic Conference, to which reference is made above, said that, quote, an increase in the efficiency of traditional export industries is in the underdeveloped countries was an obvious move, but it was politically unattractive. It suggested the continued acceptance of the old colonial economy. Industrialism was an integral part of the nationalist movement. Its mainspring was not economic but political, and political expediency was often more important than economic efficiency in the location of new industry. End quote. The more efficient management of primary production and improvement on a marketing level is imperialism's gain and our loss. The point has been made quite clearly by no less a person than the chairman of BOLSA, the Bank of London in South America, Sir George Bolton. The latter was reported in the Financial Times of the 6th of March 1964 as being confident of a rise in commodity prices, for which would have considerable effect on foreign exchanges. For whose benefit? Sir George provides the answer, quote, it should help the reserve currencies, sterling and the dollar, end quote. He said, why? Because being tied to these currencies, quote, the primary producers will be accumulating their surpluses in the sterling and dollar balances, unquote. This appears to be nothing short of a direct confession of the major interest of banking and financial world in the exploitation of developing countries. It is interesting, therefore, to note that Bolsa's transfer agents in London are Patino Mines and Enterprises Consolidated, the American-controlled combine operating mines in Latin America and Canada, and intimately associated with groups engaged in exploiting Africa's natural resources. We are certainly not against marketing and trading. On the contrary, we are for widening our potentialities in these spheres, and we are convinced that we shall be able to adjust the balance in our favor only by developing an agriculture attuned to our needs and supporting it with rapidly increasing industrialization that will break the neo-colonialist pattern which at present operates. A continent like Africa, however much it increases its agricultural output, will not benefit unless it is sufficiently politically and economically united to force the developed world to pay a fair price for its cash crops. To give one illustration, both Ghana and Nigeria have in post-war independence period enormously developed their production of cocoa. As the table on page 10 shows. We'll get to that soon. The result has not been obtained by chance. It is the consequence of heavy internal expenditure on control of disease and pests, the subsidizing of insecticides, and the spraying machines provided to farmers, and the importing of new varieties of cocoa seedlings, which are resistant to the endemic ills which previous cocoa trees have developed. By means such as these, Africa as a whole greatly increased her cocoa production, while that of Latin America remained stationary. What advantage has Nigeria or Ghana gained through this stupendous increase in agricultural productivity? In 1954-55, when Ghana's production was 210,000 tons, her 1954 earnings from the cocoa crop were 851 million. I don't know what, I think it's pounds. I'm not sure, but I don't really know currency symbols too much. Yeah. This year, 1964-65, with an estimated crop of 590,000 tons, the estimated external earnings will be around 77 million. So, almost twice the production with a significant decrease in how much was made. Nigeria has suffered a similar experience. In 1954-55, she produced 89,000 tons of beans and received for her crop 391 million. In 1965, it is estimated that Nigeria will produce 310 tons and is likely to receive for it around 40 million. In other words, Ghana and Nigeria have trebled their production of this particular agricultural product, but their gross earnings from it have fallen 125 million to 117 million. A detailed study of production and price shows that it is the developed consuming country which obtains the advantage of increased production in the less developed one. So long as African agricultural producers are disunited, they will be unable to control the market price of their primary products. As experience with the Cocoa Producers Alliance has shown, any organization which is based on mere commercial agreement between primary producers is insufficient to secure a fair world price. This can only be obtained when the united power of the producer countries is harnessed by the common political and economic policies and has behind it the united financial resources of the states concerned. So long as Africa remains divided, it will therefore be wealthy consumer countries who will dictate the price of African cash crops. Nevertheless, even if Africa could dictate the price of its cash crops, this would not by itself provide the balanced economy which is necessary for development. The answer must be industrialization. The African continent, however, cannot hope to industrialize effectively in the haphazard, laissez-faire manner of Europe. In the first place, there is the time factor. In the second, the socialized modes of production and tremendous human and capital investments involved call for cohesive and integrated planning. Africa will need to bring to its aid all its latent ingenuity and talent in order to meet the challenges that independence and demands of people far better living have raised. The challenge cannot be met on any piecemeal scale, but only by the total mobilization of the continent's resources within the framework of comprehensive socialist planning and deployment. We have noted that in countries of the highest settler populations, and therefore the most exploited so far in Africa, Algeria, Congo, Kenya, Morocco, Rhodesia, Malawi, South Africa, Tanganyika, agriculture is predominant. In the case of South Africa, the most highly developed area of the African continent, the contribution of agriculture and mining is together equal to that of industry, manufacture, and construction. South Africa's economy is heavily bolstered by the export of its mining output. Gold contributes up to 70% of the total exports, which makes the economy, for all its apparent boom and the heavily increasing foreign investment, basically almost as insecure as that of the less developed countries of the continent. For all its pushing secondary industries, its chemical manufacture, military production, steel processing, and the rest, South Africa has so far failed to lay down the basis of solid industrialization. G.E. Manel, chairman of the Anglo-Transvaal Consolidated Investment Company, which controls gold, diamonds, and uranium, made a most telling statement in his annual address on the 6th of December 1963 to the Johannesburg shareholders' meeting. Quote, "This nation's economy is based to a significant degree on wasting assets, the gold mines of Transvaal and Orange Free State. We have become more and more aware of this in recent years, as more mines near the end of their lives without any sign of new large gold fields, in spite of the many millions being spent on exploration." End quote. Investment in South Africa's economy comes mainly from Western capital, with which local finance, not hardly enough to stand on its own feet, is strongly bound. Quick profits are the incentive, so that while Anglo-Transvaal's chairman sees the dangers to the economy, he was nonetheless happy to be able to announce that record profits were again achieved in 1963. The whole of the economy is geared to the interests of the foreign capital that dominate it. South Africa's banking institutions, like those of most other African states, are offshoots of the Western banking and financial houses. South Africa is dominated by Western monopoly, even more than by other sectors of the continent, because the investments are many times greater and the dependence upon gold and other mining as the center of the economy gears it inextricably to that monopoly. Its vulnerability is intensified by the fact that it is a supplier of crude and semi-finished products to the factories of the West on a larger scale than the whole rest of Africa, and an earner of greater profits for their financial backers. Nigeria tells in a few basic figures a tale of a different kind of economic maladjustment. In 1960, agriculture, forestry, and fishing accounted for 63% of the economic activity, mining 1%. The imbalance is emphasized by the extremely low ratio of 2% for industry and manufacture, eliminating at once any comparison with the 1% contribution of mining and 4% of agriculture to America's total economic product. In the case of the United States, this low proportion supports a vast superstructure of industry and manufacture. In Nigeria, it connotes simply a total disregard under colonialism of Nigeria's potentialities. The reason for this lies not in the fact that Nigeria is devoid of natural industrial resources, as recent findings of oil and iron confirm. It was that Nigeria's agriculture provided greater profitability for European investment than the risks that were involved in larger capital provisions called for by mining, exploration, and exploitation. In 1962, petroleum and petroleum products contributed 99% to Nigeria's exports, but it's Shell BP that hopes to reap most of the benefits. The bulk of these exports was in crude oil, exceeding 3 million tons. The oil company is aiming at an export target of 5 million tons of crude oil by 1965. Processing plants are in Europe, not in Nigeria. Generally speaking, in spite of the exploration costs, which are written off for tax purposes anyway, and many times covered by eventual profits, mining has provided a very profitable venture for foreign capital investment in Africa. Its benefits for the Africans, on the other hand, despite all the frothy talk to the contrary, have been negligible. This is explained by the absence of industry and manufacture based upon the use of domestic natural resources, and of the trade that is their concomitant. I don't know what that word means, but we can use context clues. For mining production is destined principally for exportation in its primary form. Certain exceptions to this generalization are to be found in South Africa, Zambia, and the Congo. Some small conversions have been taking place also in countries like Morocco, Algeria, and Mozambique. South Africa's copper is exported in the form of metal, and a small part of its iron is sent overseas as ingots. Its gold is refined. But for these exceptions, most exported minerals are shipped from Africa in their primary state. They go to feed the industries and plants of Europe, America, and Japan. The ore that is to be produced in Swaziland by the Swaziland Iron Ore Development Company, owned jointly by the Anglo-American Corporation and the powerful British steel group Guest, Keene, and Nettlefolds. Fucking stupid name. We go at the rate of 1.2 million tons annually for 10 years from 1964 to a Japanese steel combine. When the countries of their origin are obliged to buy back their minerals and other raw products in the form of finished goods, they do so at grossly inflated prices. A General Electric advertisement carried in the March-April 1962 issue of Modern Government informs us that from the heart of Africa to the hearths of the world's steel mills comes ore for stronger steel, better steel, steel for buildings, machinery, and more steel rails, end quote. With this steel from Africa, General Electric supplies transportation for bringing out another valuable mineral for its own use and that of other great imperialist exploiters. In lush verbiage, the same advertisement describes how, quote, deep in the jungle of Central Africa lies one of the world's richest deposits of manganese ore, end quote. But is it for Africa's needs? Not at all. The site, which is being developed by the French concern Compagnie Minière de la Ougou, European stuff, is located on the upper reach of the the Aguwe River in the Gabon Republic. After the ore is mined, it will be carried 50 miles by cableway. Then it will be transferred to ore cars and hauled 300 miles by diesel-electric locomotives to the port of Pointe Noire for shipment to the world's steel mills. For, quote-unquote, the world, read the United States first and France second. The exploitation of this nature can take place is due to the balkanization of the African continent. Balkanization is the major instrument of neocolonialism and will be found wherever neocolonialism is practiced. I want to just take a second because I want to talk about how white supremacists in America talk about balkanization as a tool to their needs. Basically, they say that because they want to create a white ethno-state. Then they create, the other ethno-states, which then can be neo-colonized in this exact same manner by countries like Europe, etc., etc. Just a little forward from my own mind. And that's the end of this first chapter. Africa's resources. I'd like to say that a lot of the things that were read in here that were going on in the 60s are still going on today in Africa, and we can read about them all the time. And it's very important that we look to Africa as the cradle of neo-colonialism, and we analyze it to better help ourselves all over the world, all neo-colonized peoples. So I'll probably either record the next chapter today or tomorrow and release it. Thanks everybody for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and share. And if you want more content, if you have specific books you'd like me to read, just post it down there in the comments and I'll do that. I read all the time. Eventually, these videos are going to be more my personal opinions on things. And I say opinions loosely because most of what I say is based in factual reality. So it's more like my personal analyses of things. So have a great day, and thanks for listening. Goodbye.